and salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to 3 Peas in a Pod, episode 202.
We made it.
That just flowed right off the tongue right there.
Yeah.
202. That's right. 2 past 200. And we were just discussing just a second ago. I had a conversation with my daughter the other day that made me feel really, really old. And I was telling the guys, we all remember film cameras.
Mm-hmm.
Remember those cameras that had film in them?
Nathan, do you remember?
Oh
that?
yeah, 100%. I used to have a what now are called I'm trying to think of but it was a Panasonic camera. We now would call them DSLRs.
Yeah,
okay.
They were
SLR camera back in the day.
Yeah, so I was talking to my youngest daughter, who is 17, about the fact that there used to be cameras with film in them, and you would have thought I was talking to her in Greek. She had no idea what that was about. So I had to explain that there were cameras that had a limited amount of pictures in them, and then you take them to other stores and bring back the pictures, and they'd be surprises. And
you forgot that you were taking them.
And that was the best part about going to camp was when people would bring their disposable cameras, they'd leave them in the cabin, and you'd go take a bunch of pictures that their mom didn't want them to see, and then that was the very first picture they'd have.
Exactly.
We used to do that every year.
So much fun was had around these cameras.
That's right.
That our kids, my
no
kids
one ever
know
knew.
nothing about now. But that's interesting.
Because their cameras are full of, there's a group of friends, let's take 16 of these. They're all basically the same. And you go, same shot. Have you seen the Google technology they're advertised?
Where you can change faces?
That's the most amazing thing.
It is. It scares me, though, because now I'm wondering, is any picture real anymore?
No.
Well,
we've had deep fake stuff for a while.
Yeah, we've got fakes and all that kind of stuff.
Well, those pictures are real, Jason. They just weren't all like that at one moment.
But how do I know you're not deep fake right now?
Well, you don't.
See,
you don't.
That's true.
We could be deep faking. We talked about last week how he's going to be gone.
Let's hope
we can just bring in deep fake Ed.
It'll be better than this.
Oh, really?
I bet you.
We should all get our SAG-AFTRA cards so that we can make sure we're not, and no one can AI duplicate us in the future.
You don't know what?
I know it's SAG is Screen Actors Guild. What's the other part?
That's the full title, SAG-AFTRA. I don't know what it stands for. It's like it's.
You know how I hate that stuff where people throw out letters that mean
the original one was Screen Actors Guild. Charlie, look it up. Producer Charlie's going to look it up. I think they're additional things. I think they now don't just have screen actors.
And fine.
No, don't try it.
Wait a minute. This is the best part of having them. That you get to make stuff up. AFTR, is that what it is?
AFTRA.
And fine. Tuna.
I bet it's like theater.
American Federation of Television and Radio Artists.
Way far off.
That's right.
Are they radio artists still?
Yes, they've combined the two. That is what it was.
They are.
So anyway, they
aren't we current radio? Podcast is radio.
Podcast is not regulated in any way whatsoever.
Well, that's
and it shows.
It does.
It does.
I could just play the entire audio of a copyrighted movie on a podcast, and they can't do anything about it.
Wow.
Because no one's regulating
That
it.
sounds
now I can't put it on YouTube.
Yeah,
but I can do. You can. The podcasts are a Wild Wild West, my friend.
So here we are in the Wild Wild West, boys. I wonder if this question is going to qualify for the Wild Wild West.
Any of y'all remember the original Wild Wild West beside me? Am I the only original?
I just thought that was a generic term.
Oh, no.
No, he means the TV show.
There's a real TV show?
Oh, yeah, but that the movie with Will Smith is based on.
Oh, yeah. It was one of my favorites when I was growing up.
Jim West.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
We have a question. Y'all ready for it?
They are ready for us to get to the question.
They are definitely ready.
AFTR.
That's
AFTRA.
That's 4 minutes of your life you won't get back.
Yep. Send in what you think those should mean.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, here's the question. And this is, like I said last week, it comes from the book of Genesis, which I'm not sure I have any answers. Someone does.
Answers in Genesis.
Answers in Genesis has an answer.
Yeah, they do.
But I don't know if I have any. But here's the question.
Their answer is everything's literal. Everything, absolutely everything is literal.
Absolutely everything.
Everything.
Here it is. Are all humans descendants of Adam and Eve? Or did God create more people apart from their family? I don't understand how Adam and Eve's sons could have procreated without there being women on earth. Very good observation.
That is.
It's a good observation.
Very astute.
They do have sisters.
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah, we know that.
So what?
Well,
Are
again,
you insinuating
I'm
something?
just saying there are answers in Genesis.
Yeah.
They aren't always
They're not
really
the answers
popular.
you want.
They aren't always really popular.
Yes.
So I mean, I think
you have
to
an
be
opinion?
faithful to what we should say at the beginning of this, I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know is the most accurate answer. We're going to talk longer than that, but I think we should just start and say, and I always want us to come back to, maybe we can come back to this at the end if we have time.
Okay. All right.
That's not the point of the story in Genesis.
Yeah.
And so, you know,
That is the first point and probably the last point we should make.
I was watching
Genesis is not trying to tell you where all people came from.
I was recently watching the movie Christmas Movie Classic, which we will be doing I don't know when this is coming out, but we are doing a drive-in movie experience at the church around the Christmas Movie Classic. Yeah.
What does that
Oh,
mean?
you guys are just hearing about this?
I did not know about
Well,
this.
we're doing it.
We only work here.
Okay, yeah. Well, you're gonna be hearing about it Sunday.
Drive-in movie.
Yeah, we're gonna have drive-in.
In December?
Well, you don't have to have the windows down.
You know, we didn't say get out of the car and sit on.
You can be warm in a car, Ed.
Okay. all
They
right.
have heat, right?
I know, but
You know, they have radio transmitters now.
I-
That's how we're pumping in the sound.
I understand.
We're not getting one of them little speakers you hang on the side of your car.
Shoot.
Getting you a little tray.
That's what he
Anyway,
remembers.
we're doing
Yeah.
a Christmas drive-in movie around the Christmas Movie Classic, Home Alone.
Perfect.
Oh,
All right.
Okay.
So anyway, I was recently watching the movie Home Alone with a group of people, and the conversation now that's very popular for people to have is, if you remember the movie Home Alone with the big house, massive houses, what did Mr. McAllister do for a living that not only could he afford that house in Chicago, but also afford to take 20-something people to Paris at Christmas time? And as I said, the reason the house is big is they needed it for the third act. You're asking the wrong question when you're watching this movie.
Yeah.
It's a fun thing to have. They're fun little conversations to have. But if you are watching Home Alone thinking about what business did he do, what that is not the point of
The
this
same
movie.
thing when you watch any sci-fi movie and you go,
Yes.
no, explain how that could happen. It's a sci.
Just go with it.
It's fiction. That back part of sci is fiction.
Yes.
So are you saying that? Okay.
Genesis is fiction? No, that's not what I'm saying.
You're
What I'm saying
asking
is
the wrong question.
What I'm saying is when you get to, I also don't know who George Washington's next door neighbor was when he was a child, or ever he even had a neighbor when he grew up, because when anyone writes a biography of a person, they're not telling you everything. They are telling you the details that are pertinent to the story they are trying to tell. And the story in Genesis is not trying to tell us particularly about how every human being came to be. The point of the story of Genesis is how humanity itself, and in particular, the nation of Israel, gets off track. How the whole thing, that almost all of, and I think this is,
Well, and I think even more than the nation of Israel, I think Genesis is the start of the story, and here's the important thing, of God. This is not humanity's story. This is not Earth's story. This is a story God has decided to tell about himself. God is telling a story about himself. In the first part is why I created. What am I trying to do? And that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is how is not the question to bring to Genesis as much as who.
Yeah, well, and I just think, I think that's a good way of
It wasn't a
saying.
question ancient people asked.
Or it was, but it wasn't the story they were trying to tell. I think we have somehow, and I have this with most parts in the Bible, when people get to why isn't this in the Bible and why don't people talk about this and why did this, it's not the story that God is trying to tell. As you said, God is telling a story about himself. But God's not also revealing everything about himself.
No.
He is revealing what is pertinent about himself to the way we are to interact with him. It is a story about God interacting with human beings. It's why when people say, well, what was God doing before there was an earth? I don't know, because he didn't need to tell me.
Yeah.
Before he created.
Chose
If
not
God's
to.
existed throughout all time, what's he doing? Did the angels exist before the earth? I don't know, because I can't figure any of this out.
Everything I know about God, he told me.
And he said it's all sufficient. It's all that I actually need to be able to interact in this life with him. Because I always come to people as, what does it really change about your day-to-day life and the way you interact with God if Adam and Eve's kids made all the human beings together. I get there's a lot of like, well, that seems creepy and weird and all those kind of things.
Well, there's a lot of things that seem creepy and weird in certain cultures.
Yes.
To me.
Yeah, for sure.
And if not, the Bible...
I guarantee you, if you're from the South, somewhere in your past, somebody related to somebody is married to each other.
Oh, man.
And that may be true all over the world. I just know the South.
Yeah. But regardless, what difference does that make about the way I interact with God? Certainly by saying, well, that's the way, and I'm not saying that's even what I think is what happened. What I'm saying is, if that is the way it happened, I don't think anyone takes that and goes, well, I guess God's okay with this.
Right.
Because that's not what anyone who believes that doesn't think that's the point of what that
Well, and
is.
they're not really reading the story. If I find an instance, let's say, of bigamy, and I think, okay, God's okay with bigamy, I'm not reading the rest of the story. I was looking for an answer to figure out how I could be okay with bigamy. If I look and say, is God okay with slavery? Well, it mentions slaves, so he must be okay with slavery.
Right.
I'm not reading the story as being told.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought that was important to say. But there does seem to me, also I'll put my answer out first on what I think. I think there is evidence to support that there were other human beings on the planet other than just Adam and Eve. Once again, because the nature of the story of Genesis, and this is why I brought up the nation of Israel. If you read Exodus and Deuteronomy and all that, everything that happens in the entire book of Genesis gets repeated throughout the nation of Israel going forward. They are repeated cycles that just continue to happen. Everything from the original sin in the Garden of Eden to then Abraham gets chosen, instantly starts lying and deceiving and acting the same way. Jacob's a liar and deceiver, but somehow God chooses him. And then the nation of Israel are liars and deceivers, and they continue to go forward. God is starting with a specific group of people, Adam and Eve, and then chooses a specific man, Noah. Then he chooses a specific man, Abraham, and goes forward to that. But there seems to me the evidence, specifically, I guess the one most people point to is Cain and Abel. When God sends Cain out with the mark of Cain on his head and says, hey, this is going to protect you from anyone, from anyone who might want to do you harm, which assumes there are other people
out there
that want to do you harm.
And he goes and immediately starts a city.
Yeah.
Which means there are enough people around to start a city with.
Exactly.
So to me, that's so I don't know what you guys think.
I was going to say, if you were asking for, a personal opinion, past, I don't know for sure. That's where I lean these days is there had to be something else that I don't understand going on about where the folks were, who they were, where they came from. There's something else that the book of Genesis just doesn't tell us, but it just sort of assumes. And that's okay with me. It gets back to this whole thing where this becomes a problem, I think, is for people who, like you said, Nathan, come at the book of Genesis with this really hard literal interpretation of, this is a blow-by-blow account of creation. This is a blow-by-blow account of people and where they came from. And there was only 2 and then there was 4 and it went from there. I think if you come at Genesis with that expectation and type of reading, you're going to have some problems. So I'm not saying I know what all the answers are. I'm saying that I think there's more going on to the story than what we are given.
It's the same thing as coming to the book of Revelation, which is the last book, and you have questions that it's not trying to answer. If you assume Genesis is about how scientifically everything started and how we explain all of that stuff, I think you have a problem. If you come and before you ever read the book, you assume this is about the future. If you assume that this is going to tell me about the future, well, you're the one bringing that question in. The author didn't tell you to bring that question. True. You didn't read the thing and come up with that. Someone told you to bring that question. Well, that's similar to, I just again go back, most ancient people had a story that they told about how the world came to be. And this is how God reveals this story to Israel. And it's interesting, if you read them, there are things that are similar and there are things that are vast. It's one of the fun things that I got to do when I was studying this years ago in Bible college is you get to, our professors were not afraid of showing me the other things. You get to read all of those things too and you go, oh, there's similarities and there's real differences. And the differences is what God is telling about himself.
And that's what he uses to say. My story it ought to stand out.
Right.
It's not, and people like to use that as a reason where, it can't all be true because they're all just copying off of each other. Well, not necessarily.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
God is trying to make a distinct point through the differences that in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the truth is, most of the other stories are really, really, really similar.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But this story has similarities, but it has some really, really big differences.
Mm-hmm.
Well, differences in that it literally comes against the stories of the ancient
That's
Greeks,
right.
of what they were telling. Is this stands in stark contrast to what had been told throughout those centuries.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, I don't have anything else to say about it. Do you? Do you guys? Do you have any other thoughts on this?
Not that I think are really important. I feel bad now thinking about the tone at which we set early on for the person. And I just say, I think your question's well-founded. My guess is somebody told you that that's probably the way to start reading it. And they probably well-intentioned because somebody told them that. And
I think it's also the way that we read. I think it's the way we were taught. And most of us assume about the Bible is that it is like the guide to everything. Mm-hmm. That it is somehow like the manual for life or the guidebook for X, Y, and Z. And so
basic instructions before leaving Earth.
Yeah.
Very bad.
Yeah.
I hate it.
That's Bible. But I think the way we come to it, and I hear people even when I'm in my TikTok moods and I'll get on TikTok. Apparently, I've watched enough videos that my algorithm has me with people who are either deconstructing their faith or ex-evangelicals as they're often called, and they're trying to poke holes in the Bible, they've kind of got their thought. The general thought and the general logic behind it is if there is an all-knowing God and He has revealed Himself through a book, then the book should be able to stand up to any question. You know what I mean? Like an all-knowing God would have all knowledge, so wouldn't He know that I was going to ask these questions ahead of time and blah, blah, blah? And my answer to that has always been, the Bible first and foremost is a story. It is not a dictionary. It's not an encyclopedia. It is not a thing that I can just look up and reference what I want to reference. The idea behind the Bible is one, as we've said, it would be read within a community. It then would form that community. The community then forms the people within the community. And it's the Spirit of God that is in all of those things at work. And so when you're reading these stories again and again and again, I can already see this with my kids. And I remember how this was when I was little. I remember, reading through, and you start to just get to know all these stories. My kids know so much of the Bible, and it just shocks me for their age. But they go to church every week, and they sit and they read the Bible, every morning. And, they just have all these stories. And so one time, we're sitting reading through the book of Exodus, and this is a big one for a lot of people, is the 10th plague in Egypt is God's going to kill all the firstborn babies. And which there's a lot of evidence to say it's not actually God that kills the firstborn babies. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But even if it is, I remember saying, so why would that happen? And one of my daughters said, well, didn't all the Egyptians kill all the firstborn babies of the Israelites? And I said, yeah. And they said, do you think those two things are supposed to remind you of, or they didn't say it in that way, but basically got to, are those things connected? And I said, yes, absolutely, they're connected. And that's how you're supposed to read it. You're supposed to read Romans and think back to Genesis. You're supposed to read through Amos and be brought all the way. And this is the brilliance of it. It's why to me, it's the most brilliant literature. And I'm a big literature. I love themes and I'm the film guy. I love all that stuff. It's the most brilliant piece of literature because even in the book of Amos, stuff that's written 600 years later is referencing it. And what Matthew and them say is it's fulfilling those things, that it's somehow giving more meaning to it than what was written. And it's all written over this long period of time, but it's all referencing on one another. So all of that to say, it's not a book that's an encyclopedia that if I need to figure out anything, just go to your Bible and open it and you'll figure it out. It's a story that I get so deep within me that instead of when I read the story of Adam and Eve go, why don't their children get spoused? I'm not saying you're wrong for thinking that. All of us feel that way. What I would hope to redirect you as your pastor to think is, when you read the story of Adam and Eve, just get whatever you, just take it. I don't even know you're supposed to even get a lot. Get the story into you. So the next time you're sitting somewhere and you have the thought, does God really care if I do X, Y, and Z? It should trigger to your brain the words of the serpent that said, did God really say not to eat from that? That's the point. The story is supposed to get within me so that when I'm interacting in the world, or like in the story of the Egyptians, when I see any nation, including my own nation, thinking it's okay that there may just be innocents that get wiped out, it should bring something in my soul and go, you know, God looked at Egypt when Egypt decided that there were some people, in order to maintain power, that all their children had to die. And I look at another nation. That story should be within me so that I know how to live in this world in such a way that I look like Jesus, not the minute answers. And I'm not saying they don't matter. I'm just saying I think there is a way in which those are the questions many of us think, I really got to get an answer to. And I don't ever think seriously about the things that are happening in the world around me and think, what would God have to say about that?
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think a lot of people are given questions like that, and like you said, Nathan, that are used to try and discredit the whole thing. And it's like, if we can find one thing in the Bible that is contradictory or immoral, so to speak, then we can discredit God somehow, or the whole thing. So I pointed back to this book that Greg Boyd wrote, Inspired Imperfection. He talks about there are a lot of imperfections within the scriptures.
Sure.
There are a lot of things that are descriptive of what was going on that do not line up with the character and nature of Jesus. And we don't have to hide these things because they don't match up with Jesus. We can look at them and go, no, they don't. And what do we do with that as a community? And how do we respond to that? It does not impugn God's character whatsoever just because it's in there. In fact, I think in some ways it's for our good.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the way I see it too.
It just reminds us, you know, that anything that I see there that doesn't fit with the character of Jesus reminds me why Jesus had to come.
Exactly.
Sure.
This kind of stuff has been going on with all kinds of evil that are now unthinkable to us. The one thing I know for sure, because I've watched it happen in my lifetime, and it's getting faster and faster, things that you thought were okay at 18 and everybody in culture thought was 18, when you get to be 60, most of culture will think, how in the world did anybody think that was right?
That's right.
And my guess is that's going to get faster and faster the shorter time that we begin to look back and go, how could we ever think that? And that's the reason for Jesus. We just keep screwing stuff up. I mean, and he is the way to help us get it right. We follow the way of Jesus.
I was just watching a TV show with my kids, and I think it was like a show produced in the 90s. And there's stuff in there that go, how in the world y'all get away with saying that kind of stuff back then? And I'm like, you just had to live there.
Yeah, that's right.
It honestly, we didn't think about that. It didn't even cross our minds.
No.
And now I see it differently too. I go, that wasn't right.
That was messed up.
That was messed up.
That's exactly right.
But hopefully that is a sign that I'm growing.
So here's my last thing about Cain's wife.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to share a Dwight Moody quotation.
Oh, wow.
Famous evangelist Dwight Moody or Billy Sunday. I can't remember which one.
Or Ed Martin.
No, it's one of those famous evangelist guys who is asked this question by a guy.
All right. We should have just played that.
I can't believe in Jesus because where did Cain get his wife from? And the answer was, sir, if you're worried about Cain's wife, you won't be the first man to go to hell over another man's wife. That's not the correct answer. I just can't ever forget it. I thought, that's witty as all get out.
That's great.
Yes.
Which means it probably didn't actually happen that way.
No,
somebody wrote that later.
That's a great quote to end on. So we will end on that one. So, as I said last week, we're still taking your questions as always. Our link is in the description for you to send us those questions and get us talking about whatever topic you want us to talk about. Next week, we're going to be talking about a topic that Ed, once again, has stirred up controversy on. No shocker there.
I do not try to do this.
Sure you don't. We believe you, Ed.
Good.
So someone has a question about something that we talked about in a message a few weeks ago. And so we're going to hopefully clear that up for y'all. So come back next week. You'll find out what that is and what we have to say about it. So have a great week. See you next time.